April 13th, 1844, New York City. A newspaper hits the streets with a headline that stops people in their tracks. A balloon has crossed the Atlantic Ocean, not in weeks, not in months, in just 75 hours. Crowds swarm the newspaper office. People are shoving coins at newsboys, desperate for a copy. There's just one problem. It never happened, and the man behind it is one of the most famous writers in American history. The year is 1844, and Edgar Allan Poe is broke. He's brilliant, sure. He's already written eerie tales that will one day make him a legend. But right now, he's scraping by on whatever pennies magazines and newspapers will pay him. He needs money, he needs attention, and he has a plan that combines both. Poe wasn't just a horror writer. He loved playing tricks on readers. He'd done it before, publishing fictional stories dressed up as true accounts, just to see if people would believe them. He had a gift for detail, technical, precise, believable detail. And in the 1840s, there was one subject the public simply could not get enough of. Balloons. Hot air balloons and gas balloons had been thrilling audiences for decades. Daring aeronauts floated over cities while crowds gasped below. But everyone was asking the same question. Could a balloon ever cross an ocean? Could it survive the wind, the storms, the sheer distance between Europe and America? Poe knew exactly how to answer that question, not with science, with fiction, dressed up as science. He sat down and wrote what looked, at first glance, like a real news dispatch, a breathless, urgent report of a balloon that had just done the impossible. The story he wrote described a balloon called the Victoria. Aboard it were real people, actual well-known aeronauts, including a man named Monk Mason. That detail alone made readers sit up. Mason was a real, respected balloonist. Putting his name in the story gave it instant credibility. Here's the twist. Mason really had flown a balloon before. Back in 1836, he'd piloted a real flight from London all the way to Weilburg, Germany. It was a genuine, impressive achievement in ballooning history. Poe took that real event and used it as raw material, borrowing real names and real technical language to build his fictional Atlantic crossing. According to Poe's story, the Victoria left Wales, drifted out over the Atlantic, and after battling wind and weather for 3 straight days, touched down near Charleston, South Carolina. 75 hours, thousands of miles, an ocean crossed by air, decades before anyone thought it possible. To make it believable, Poe didn't just say the balloon made it across, he explained how. He described a clever steering mechanism, a screw propeller that let the pilots guide the balloon instead of just drifting helplessly with the wind. It sounded like real engineering. It was completely invented. Poe layered in more details, precise measurements of the balloon's size, specific hours and dates, quotes describing the fear and exhaustion of the crew, weather conditions described almost like a ship's log. It read exactly like the serious, factual newspaper reporting people trusted every single day. And it worked. When the story hit the streets of New York, it spread like wildfire. People couldn't stop talking about it. This wasn't a rumor whispered in a tavern. This was printed in the newspaper. It had to be true. The paper carrying the story was the New York Sun, one of the most popular papers in the city, and the Sun had a bit of a reputation already. Just a few years earlier, it had run a wild series of articles claiming astronomers had discovered life on the moon. That hoax had also fooled readers for days, so maybe in hindsight, people should have been a little more cautious. But caution wasn't exactly the mood on April 13th, 1844. Witnesses described crowds gathering outside the Sun's offices, practically begging for copies. Some accounts say people were willing to pay far more than the usual price just to get their hands on the story. Everyone wanted to read about the men who had conquered the Atlantic sky. Think about what this story promised people. In 1844, crossing the Atlantic by ship took weeks. The idea that a balloon could do it in 3 days wasn't just exciting. It felt like the future arriving early. It tapped into a real hunger for progress, for speed, for proof that the impossible was becoming possible. Of course, nothing about the story was true. No balloon named the Victoria ever left Wales. No screw propeller carried anyone across the Atlantic sky in 1844. In reality, it would take well over a century before a balloon actually completed a transatlantic crossing, and that finally happened in 1978, when the Double Eagle II made the trip for real. So how long did the hoax survive? Not long. Within days, the New York Sun quietly admitted the truth. The balloon story had been fiction all along, a piece of imaginative writing, not a factual report. No grand apology, no dramatic front-page confession, just a quiet correction, almost as if they hoped people wouldn't notice how thoroughly they'd been fooled. Poe himself later described the frenzy the story caused. He noted how eager people were to grab copies, how the excitement gripped the city almost instantly. For a writer struggling to get attention, watching an entire city fall for his invented tale must have felt like a strange kind of triumph. It's worth pointing out Poe wasn't trying to commit fraud for profit in some sinister way. This fits into a long tradition of satirical and speculative hoaxes in 19th century journalism, where the line between news and entertainment was blurry, and clever writers tested just how far readers' trust could stretch. What made Poe's hoax so effective wasn't some elaborate scheme. It was craftsmanship. He understood that people don't just believe a claim because it's exciting. They believe it because of the details around it, real names, specific numbers, technical explanations. Poe gave readers exactly the kind of evidence their minds wanted, even though none of it was real. This wasn't just a party trick. Poe's ability to write convincing, detailed fictional reporting connects directly to his fame as a master of fiction. The same skills that made the balloon hoax believable also made his short stories feel disturbingly real, pulling readers into worlds that felt tangible even when they were impossible. The balloon hoax also holds up a mirror to us. Almost 2 centuries later, we still fall for convincing stories dressed up with impressive-sounding detail. Confident language, specific numbers, official-sounding sources. It turns out the tools Poe used in 1844 are the same tools that still shape belief today, whether in a newspaper, a broadcast, or a social media post. So the next time you read something that sounds too incredible, too perfectly detailed, too exciting to question, remember New York City in April of 1844. Remember the crowds crushing toward a newsstand for a story about a balloon that never flew. Sometimes the most convincing stories aren't the ones that are true. They're just the ones written well enough to feel true. Edgar Allan Poe went on to write the tales we remember him for, dark, strange, unforgettable fiction. But for a few days in April 1844, his most famous trick wasn't a story about murder or madness. It was a balloon, a bold lie, and a city that wanted so badly to believe. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more strange, true tales from history, and I'll see you in the next one.